Strange Shadows, a Clark Ashton Smith podcast.
I, Satampra Zeiros of Uzuldarum, shall write with my left hand, since I have no longer any other, the tale of everything that befell Tiruv Palios and myself in the shrine of the god Tsathoggua, which lies neglected by the worship of man in the jungle-taken suburbs of Komorion, that long deserted capital of the Hyperborean rulers. I shall write it with the violet juice of the savanna palm, which turns to a blood-red rubric with the passage of years, on a strong vellum that is made from the skin of the mastodon, as a warning to all good thieves and adventurers who may hear some lying legend of the lost treasures of Komorion and be tempted thereby.
Hello friends, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 8 of Strange Shadows, the Clark Ashton Smith podcast. The voice you just heard was Robert Lloyd Parry of Nunkie Productions, reading the opening paragraph of today's story. I am one of your hosts, Rob Poyton.
And I'm one of the other ones, Tim Mendes. Today we are three, because we are joined by Mr. Gavin Chappell.
Hey Gavin, how you doing?
I'm doing fine, yeah. I'm happy to be on the show, and I'm just waiting to talk endlessly about Satampra Zeiros, or however you pronounce him.
That's what we had down pretty much.
Yeah, we'll have some fun with that.
Right.
Yeah, we have been looking forward to this because I think we were saying last time it tops the lists of favourite Clark Ashton Smith stories. It's one of the earliest sword and sorcery stories, perhaps a forerunner of Farford and Grey Mouser and that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
I think we see now we're getting into the longer stories, and Smith really starts to hit his stride with this one, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's like even with the language, because it's like, you know, over the last few ones, there's not been that many words. Because we what we do is we pick a favourite word. Because, you know, you have the moments in Clark Ashton Smith where you have to reach for the dictionary. But this one was full of them.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So shall we start with that then? Shall we start with our favourite word? Or words?
Indeed. I've got a couple. Go for it.
I think the first one I had noticed or really enjoyed was purpureal, which simply means purple, but it's just a very nice way of saying purple, isn't it? Purpureal. Yeah.
One of my favourites with the first one was rubric.
Oh, yes.
Which is a document heading or a set of instructions and rules, like you get in church for church sermons. You know, stand up now. That's a rubric, apparently.
Oh, right. I didn't know that.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah.
I have to say, I have some favourite words in it, but there are also some favourite phrases. Sanguinary crimson.
Nice.
I think technically it's a tautology. So sanguinary means red instead of crimson. But also my favourite one of all time must be pecuniary depletion.
Yes.
Yeah. I actually thought that'd be a good name for a band.
It's a state I've often been in.
I think it's a state everyone's going to be getting into.
Welcome to the state of pecuniary depletion.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, the couple of other ones I picked up on were cressets. I never knew that was the bowl of flaming liquid. I never knew that's what it was actually called. And one that I've heard before, but I just love it because it's one of those that it's great to wrap your tongue around, is quinquangular. I love it. Quinquangular flagstones. Great.
Yeah.
I also enjoyed fetidity.
Nice. Yeah.
Which, again, it's like purpureal. You could have just said purple or fetid, but you know, it just adds that extra. Yeah. And I've said this before with Smith. I think fetidity. No, he must have made that up, but it is a word. He just put a Y on the end, but no, it's there. It's a word.
Well, what I read in Stephen Jones's collected edition is that apparently when he was quite young, he just read a page from the dictionary every day.
Yeah, and
then he'd go through all the words and look up, you know, the etymology and all the rest of it. So he knew the entire English language back to front.
Yeah, didn't he have an eidetic memory for that kind of thing?
He might very well have done. don't remember anything like that. But yeah, you probably read more than I have about it. But I do remember that because I told when I was teaching creative writing at one point, I mentioned this to some of my students, and one of them said, "I think that's going a bit far."
The long winter nights just flew by.
In his cabin in Auburn.
Yeah.
Perhaps also, before we get into the story, if Gavin, you could just introduce yourself. I know you've appeared on the Innsmouth Book Club before, but for any listeners who didn't hear that, and maybe also tell us how you got into Clark Ashton Smith in particular.
Right. Well, I'm Gavin Chappell. I edit a little zine called Lovecraftiana, which, as you can probably gather from the title, tends to include stories of Cthulhu mythos and Lovecraftian type stories, cosmic horror, eldritch, whatnot, all that kind of thing. I also edit the odd, one or two other very odd zines like Schlockweb zine and Rogue Planet Press, which I'm something to do with, I think. Well, I read H.P. Lovecraft, Robert E. Howard, writers like that when I was in my teens. And there were all these references to Clark Ashton Smith, but I hadn't. They didn't seem to be on the shelves at that particular point. But when I was a bit older, I was going around secondhand bookshops. I found, well, I know this is a podcast, so the viewers back home can't see this because they're not viewers, but this is probably the first one I got.
Panther. The
Panther ones. Yeah,
I've got the same one.
Yeah. And that's my introduction to Clark Ashton Smith. And I remember thinking, this is like H.P. Lovecraft, only better. In a lot of ways. It's like what H.P. Lovecraft wanted to be. And that's, he said that to Clark Ashton Smith, basically, at various points. I wish I could be as good as you. And also Robert E. Howard said that wonderful thing about wanting, he would give his trigger finger for Clark Ashton Smith's way with words.
Yeah, good old two-gun Bob.
True Texan style. But it was, I think, for quite a long time, those Panther editions were pretty much the only thing out there in the mainstream, with the great covers as well. There was Bruce Pennington, I think, was the artist on some of those.
Yeah, there are some incredibly weird covers.
Yeah, and a lot of the other stories were only available in sort of small press publications and that sort of thing. I guess then the Chaosium books started coming out.
Yeah, there was the Clark Ashton cycle and the Book of Ebon were the first ones, weren't they? And then later the Tsathoggua cycle. Yeah. And then the Penguin brought out the Dark Eidolon.
Ah, yes, of course, yeah.
And there was the Fantasy Masterworks one, which I have got somewhere, although I accidentally set fire to it.
How the hell did you manage that?
I knew you were going to ask that.
I like to think that was in some sort of necromantic ritual. Please.
Yeah. It was just complete stupidity. I had a whole pile of books on my bedside table, and there was a lamp next to it. And I'd be reading one book. I'd turn the light on, reading the book in bed, and every now and then I could smell this kind of burning smell. Where's that coming from? Turn the light off. There's no burning smell. Went on for several days, and suddenly I noticed smoke coming up from my treasured copy of Clark Ashton Smith. Oh, so that's an example of my appreciation of Clark Ashton Smith.
I do hope that it burned with a purpureal flame, though.
No, it was mephitic.
Oh,
that's
nice.
Oh, well played,
mephitic.
Well played.
Nice.
All right, well, speaking of publications, shall we look at the publication history?
Indeed, yeah. Taylor Satampra Zeiros was completed on November the 16th, 1929, and eventually published in Weird Tales in November 1931, so almost exactly 2 years after he wrote it. It was first rejected without comment by Astounding Stories. They basically just sent it back and said, nah. I mean, that's just, you can imagine that.
Just take it and go away.
Yeah. And Farnsworth Wright actually rejected it the first time he sent it to Weird Tales. I've got a little bit here because he sent the rejection letter to August Derleth, and I believe he sent to HBL, but we'll get to that in a minute, Rob. And he closed in his letter dated November the 11th, 1930. I shall resubmit Satampra Zeiros and one or two of others of mine presently. He rejected Satampra, which he liked very much personally, apparently, on the grounds that it would seem unreal and over-fantastic to the majority of his readers. I failed to see why it wouldn't go well enough, though, of course, it would hardly steal the popular vote from Quinn. Yeah, so he was a bit miffed.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we haven't got Derleth's response, unfortunately, but yeah.
I just think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but the name of this magazine was Weird Tales.
Yes.
And it's rejecting something for being too unreal.
Too weird for weird tales.
Too weird for weird tales.
Well, that was like the night in Malneon. It was the same thing, wasn't it? Because it was about this point where Derleth and Smith do spend a lot of time in their letters from this point on just bitching about what's with Wright.
I mean, A Night in Malneon, you can say at least it was fairly light on plot, perhaps. It was very atmospheric.
Yeah.
But this has got plot and atmosphere and mystery and weirdness. I really don't see... Again, as we were talking about earlier, this is early sword and sorcery, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
I mean, Vance, Lieber, everything else. This is one of the progenitors. I think the only thing that comes close to this is Dunsany. I was thinking like Horde of the Gibberlins, that kind of story, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, it's been compared with how Nuth would work his arse on the knolls. But I think it reminds me also of the distressing tale of Thangabrin the Jeweler as well. I mean, they've all got thieves and they've all got a weird kind of setting. And also they've all got rather downbeat endings. Thangabrin the Jeweler was so downbeat and so bizarre that C.S. Lewis hated it.
Right. All right.
It's got my vote.
Wow.
It's interesting you mention Vance because Ramsey Campbell mentions Vance. None of the foregoing tales quite prepares us for the tale of Satampra Zeiros, fiction of a kind few writers other than Smith could have written, although Jack Vance comes close in his own quirky way. And perhaps there are traces in Lieber. Seldom have the droll and terrible been so delicately balanced together, while never undermining a sense of the exotic and marvellous.
Nice.
Yeah. He's always got a lovely way with phrasing, hasn't he, Campbell, whenever we get a quote from him in these.
He does. But something about the story and how it affects sword and sorcery later on is that you have the two thieves, and you get two thieves appearing again and again. Two Sword Adventure, the original Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser story.
Yes.
But whenever anybody writes a story with two thieves, after that, like Michael Shea, for example, everyone says, "Oh, it's just a rip-off of Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser." But no, you got two thieves at this point. The first double act in sword and sorcery, arguably.
Absolutely.
Funnily enough, I just wrote one with two thieves for something he's putting together, and I was specifically channeling this as opposed, but my partner went, "Oh, this is very Fafhrd and Grey Mouser." I was like, oh.
Oddly enough, I think you're talking about Rob's new sword and sorcery.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I wrote a story with a kind of Vancian character.
Nice.
But he could well be.
And I just say to the listeners, if you want to support that, the Kickstarter is still running at the moment. I think it's got another couple of weeks to run. It's going to be called A Feast of Fools and Other Tales, and it's going to be about 10 new sword and sorcery stories. So if you'd like to put any backing towards that, that would be much appreciated. We can get some great new... I mean, the stories that are coming in are really good. Obviously, Tim and Gavin's are excellent, and some really other nice stuff coming in as well. So I'll put the link up to that in the show notes below. Thank you for the plug, chaps.
You can always count on me for a cheap plug.
So you mentioned Lovecraft there, and we have Lovecraft's response to this state of affairs. Redacted response. And we were speculating as to whether this was self-redacted, because this is in the book of letters, Dawnward Spire, Lonely Hill. And this is February the 2nd, 1930. Dear CAS, as for Wright's letter, the return of Satampra Zeiros left me too speechless even for cursing. Of all ... may Tsathoggua dissolve the ... 3 exclamation marks. 3 exclamation marks.
Oh.
He certainly has a great opinion of his precious readers. Well, I hope he tries the Dunsany experiment anyway. If it succeeds, he may be a little less hostile to a real imagination. So I'm guessing Wright at some point was thinking of publishing some Dunsany. And you think if he was prepared to publish that, why not this? Does seem very strange. But I just wanted to know what those blank words, because I can fill those in, but was that what Lovecraft was thinking of? Was he saying all the damned things?
Being Lovecraft, they were probably cyclopean and eldritch cuss words.
Nice. I like it. I'm going to have to make some now for a story and make some eldritch swear words. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. No, it's interesting about the redacted because it seems to be a running joke because in the letters between Smith and Derleth, they both do it. Yeah, and I've seen it, and they're always printed like that in anything because there's that excerpt in the foreword of the Dark Eidolon by S.T. Joshi. And it's redacted there as well. So it must have just been a thing.
Time, I suppose. I mean, you do see it in some old literature, don't you, where they say damned with a D and then a dash, or whatever. So
yeah,
how things have changed. Okay, so shall we get into the story then itself?
Yes.
Because this, I think, has one of the best opening lines of any story I've ever read.
Indeed.
So, as we've already heard from Robert Parry there, I, Satampra Zeiros of Uzuldarum, shall write with my left hand, since I no longer have any other. I mean, that's just, it's, and I think in this whole first paragraph, I think something we said before, possibly in the Abominations of Yondo, was there's almost a total world building just in one paragraph.
Yeah.
It's quite incredible.
Nice. Yeah.
We get mention of Tsathoggua, we get the jungle-taken suburbs of Comorium, the long-deserted capital of the Hyperborean rulers. We get this violet juice of the Savannah palm, vellum made from the skin of the mastodon.
Yeah. What I really like about Hyperborea is it's far in the north, it's Greenland or somewhere else like that. It's got jungles, it's got mammoths. It's just completely insane. It's a kind of tropical paradise in the far north.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah,
and I think at the end we'll talk a little bit about the Hyperborean age because there's some interesting geological stuff going on there.
Yes.
And this is the first of the Hyperborea stories as well.
It is. Yeah, but something I found interesting is that it just made me chuckle because when I was doing my research this morning, there's apparently there's a controversy about the dating of this story and the Theft of the 39 Girdles, which is basically a sequel of which one came first. And Lynn Carter thinks that this came first. But everybody else is like, well, it can't be. It can't because he's still got two hands. So it's his left hand gate almost.
Well, as far as I understand, he wrote the second one. He wrote the Theft of the 39 Girdles a lot later, but it's obviously set before. I mean, otherwise you do have a serious continuity problem round about his wrist.
Yeah.
And the thing about his age as well and stuff like that. It's
I've seen it described as a prequel, and then somewhere else it said it was a sequel as well. So, but obviously, if he's got two hands, that's got to be a prequel.
Unless there's some kind of missing story in which he regrew a hand.
Yeah, or unless it's like Mr. Harn out of Enter the Dragon, he had one of those sort of fake hand things going on, perhaps.
Or he went to Ebon and got him a necromancer. Maybe he's got a withered zombie hand or something. Dead man's hand. Yeah.
Dead man's hand. And of course, this is also the first mention of our dear old furry, batty, toad-faced fiend, Tsathoggua.
My hero.
From Saturn.
Yes, from Saturn. A furry winged toad from Saturn. I love it. I love him. He's my favourite.
I wonder how he got on with the large and peculiar cats.
There's a mashup. Again, I think we can talk about Tsathoggua at the end. There's a lot to speak about there, but he always put me in mind a little bit of the moon beasts in the Dreamlands as well, who, of course, had a big fight.
Yeah. Well, they didn't get on. Yeah. They didn't get on very well with the large and peculiar cats.
No, they didn't. That's very true. Yeah.
So there's a lot of these interesting connections we can start drawing. Well, it keeps us off the street.
This is it, isn't it?
It's the main thing.
Yeah.
And yes, as we mentioned, we've got this duo of thieves. We've got Turov Ompalios, who's his lifelong friend and trustworthy companion in all such enterprises as require deft fingers and a habit of mind both agile and adroit. So really, I think this is the first example, as Gavin was saying there, we see of this duo, the double act, that echoes in, well, so many things since virtually every sword and sorcery hero has some kind of sidekick. I think in Elric and Moonglum and everything else. I guess Robert E. Howard heroes tend to be a little bit more solitary.
Although, of course, in the film Conan the Barbarian, you have a kind of replication of the 39 Girdles, because you've got the big thief, the smaller thief, and the girlfriend.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Which is the other kind of, the triple act, possibly. I don't know how you describe it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wonder how much that mirrors fiction at the time in terms of sort of a pulp detective kind of series or noir things. Was that a
kind of
trope?
Holmes and Watson kind of double act.
Yes. Yeah. That's why I always found Karnacki to be quite peculiar in that case, because it was always him. He'd gone off and done it on his own, and he meets up with his mates in a gentleman's club and tells them over a few brandies about what had happened.
Or did
I thought that was quite... or did it?
There's always that.
Just full of it.
Yeah.
Back at Shane Walk.
Yeah.
Yes.
So our heroes are fallen on hard times. And we get a little bit of boasting here about these previous jobs that he's done as well, which is always nice. And again, even in a few words, you almost feel like you can get the whole story. I wonder if anyone has ever thought about writing these stories perhaps as well. I guess there's not many people that can write like Smith. That's the problem with that, isn't it?
No, Jack Vance would probably be one of your best options, but he's no longer around.
Yeah.
And Fritz Leiber, of course. I mean, basically did write the further adventures of Satampra Zeiros and Teru von Palios with the Vaffin the Grey Mouser.
Pretty much, yeah.
So we find them in an alley in the more humble quarter of Uzulda Room, and they stop to count their resources and found that between them they have exactly 3 pazors, which again you could have said gold coins or silver pieces or something like that, but it just adds to that richness.
Who's ever been in that kind of situation? You find you've only got 3 pazors. I don't know what they are, but
but you've just got 3 of them.
Oh, what are we going to do with them?
Well, you think it's about 3. You think it's probably about £3, isn't it? Because it's enough to buy a large bottle of pomegranate wine, which is probably like a bottle of Old English or something, White Lightning or something like that, and a couple of loaves of bread. It's like down the co-op, it'll get you a 2-litre bottle of cider and a couple of loaves of bread. So
there you go. You heard it first. We've got this exchange rate for Hyperborea in the UK. 1 pazor equals about a quid. So that's This is the eternal debate, isn't it? What do we spend it on, booze or food?
Yes. Yeah.
But not paying the landlord.
Oh, yeah, I love that bit. They went out and bought a bottle of wine and some loaves of bread and told the landlord to shove it.
Yeah, he can wait till next week. Yeah. And it did remind me of something I heard the other day, which was, what do you spend on a bottle of wine? And the answer was about half an hour, which I thought was nice.
Pretty slow going, really.
And that's kind of what happens here, isn't it? They say, well, the bread will nurture our bodies, will lend a new and more expeditious force to our spent limbs and our toil-worn fingers. And Satampra responds, well, the pomegranate wine will ennoble our thoughts, will inspire and illuminate our minds, and will perchance will reveal to us a mode of escape from our present difficulties.
Yeah. And that is just this kind of story. I mean, Clark Ashton Smith in general, but also the kind of later things like the Jack Vance and Fritz Leiber stories. You've got all that high-sounding rhetoric, and they're basically talking about getting drunk, robbing someone.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Let's get pissed and nick someone's purse. Yeah.
And that's part of the irony, is it, of this stuff. We have these incredibly rich settings I think one thing you find with Hyperborean in general is everyone seems to be on the take and on the make.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very sort of cutthroat world, or cut purse world, perhaps.
But again, like a lot of Smith's stuff, it's a place in steady decline, isn't it? It's a kingdom that's seen far better days, and now it's sort of just clinging on to life. So everybody's skint, downtrodden, drunk, and there's necromancers and God knows what stalking the lands, you know.
And yet you've got this incredible prose that the story is told in.
Yeah.
But another thing about the Hyperborean stories and most of Smith's stories is you've got this incredible backdrop. And there's a reference to the White Sibyl of Polarian. There's the prophecy how Camorium was deserted because of it. That's very Dunsanian. But you've got these massive backdrops. And there's a story where the White Sibyl gives her prophecy. And there's a story, thousands of years later with a couple of thieves. But also, that's one of the things about Clark Ashton Smith. You get these vast cycles, and people are very small in all that. The background is really the hero, and every now and then you got characters who really stand out, like Satampra Zeiros. But it's against that massive backdrop, and yet it's just disposed of in a few words. The prophecy of the White Sibyl, all that.
Yeah. And that's the genius of Smith, is he doesn't do like a Robert E. Howard Hyperborean age essay.
Or Silmarillion.
Oh yeah, well that's a real extreme, right?
Blimey! I never made it to the end of that.
I did read it once, but it was a long time ago, and I probably skimmed a lot of it. I did start listening to the Prancing Pony podcast. Working through it recently. It's a very good podcast. I listened to the Lord of the Rings, and I thought in preparation for the Rings of Power TV show, I'll start listening to their read-through of the Silmarillion, and they explain everything. And even that, to be honest, I found my attention wandering, shall we say.
Yeah. If you can get through to halfway through, that's when humans start getting involved. And it does get quite interesting. Before that, there are giant spiders and things like that, but there's a lot of I couldn't
it's
really.
It's a big info dump, isn't it? It's just like hundreds of pages of info dump.
It's not a novel. It's not a novel. But Clark Ashton Smith, on the other hand, could do that in half a paragraph.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
You get a sense of that vast history that you get from Silmarillion if you actually wade through it, but in a couple of sentences.
Yeah. It is quite a remarkable feat. And I think with Robert E. Howard, you have that same sense, obviously, of prehistory or long eons and cycles of history, but he's more the character, isn't he? The character is almost bigger than the setting.
Very much so.
Conan strides across the kingdoms of the world, kind of thing, isn't it? Yeah.
And Satampra Zeiros is one story where Clark Ashton Smith gets close to that. His thieves are not quite Conan, but they are larger than life heroes in their own way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the fact that you have a sequel or a prequel is, I think that's the only time Clark Ashton Smith really did kept the same characters.
Yeah, he's done stories that obviously follow on from each other with his cycles, but yeah, it's the only recurring characters, I think. Oh, and apart from obviously Ebon.
Aside from the last incantation, the necromancer for that appears in one other story, I think.
Yeah, apart from all those. Apart from all those recurring characters,
Apart from but they're not like it's not like a series of Solomon Kane stories, is it? Or Bram McMahon or Conan. And we wondered before if this was one reason Clark Ashton Smith didn't get that same popularity.
Yeah,
you couldn't attach even Lovecraft has Cthulhu, who actually doesn't appear in that many Lovecraft stories, but
mainly in dreams.
Yeah.
So we wonder if because you don't have that identification with a hero, that's why he never got to the same heights.
Robert E. Howard managed to be more commercial in a way, a pulp kind of way.
I suppose coming up at that time as well with the pulps and then into the comics, it was about the superhero almost, wasn't it? Your Supermans and Batmans and everything.
Yeah.
So we get this little bit of backstory, as we mentioned, about Camorium being abandoned because of the prophecy and the new capital being established at Uzuldarum. But when everyone came out of Comorium, all the tombs of the kings and rulers stayed there, and more importantly, so did their jewels and gems.
Yeah.
So a plan is hatched over a bottle of palm wine, like the best plans always are.
That's what made me laugh. It's kind of like it's almost like you see in the East End flicks, like Lock, Stock and Two Smoky Barrels and stuff, isn't it? It's two guys down on the look getting pissed up, going, I know, let's go rob that old tomb.
Yeah, basically it's about a couple of guys who decide to rob a haunted house. Effectively, that's what it is.
Yes.
There's the old story.
Yeah.
Oh, let's rob the haunted house, and then they find out why it's a bad idea and why no one else has robbed it.
Yeah, because you have that lovely bit about his Satampra Zeiros' companion sort of getting a bit of jittery about it. You know, and he's like, "Oh, come on! Don't tell me you're falling for their old superstitions." Yeah. It's like it is that classic trope, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know,
but on a Clark Ashton Smith scale.
Yeah, and the fact that it's an entire city, not just some gloomy house in the woods, yeah.
And they get so taken with this plan, they're almost going to set out that very night.
Been there.
I like this. If we had only had the encouragement and inspiration of a second bottle of pomegranate wine, it's almost like that wouldn't have made them too drunk to do it. That just would have spurred them on to, I guess it's sort of Dutch courage, isn't it? Or whatever the equivalent is in the Hyperborean.
Exactly, yeah.
Vormithadreth courage.
Oh, that's easy for you to say.
Yeah.
After another bottle of pomegranate wine.
Yes, indeed.
So, of course, they sleep in late, hungover, and they leave the next day. It's just this. He could have said, we slept late, the sun came up, but the sun had ascended far upon the azure acclivity of the heavens when we left the gates of Ulzuldarum. I mean,
yeah,
it's just Smith again, isn't it?
But I love a line just a little bit before that. In the meanwhile, we repaired to our lodgings, where the landlord met us with a grudging welcome and most ungracious demand for his money.
Yeah, I love it. It's the most well-spoken thieves you've ever known.
It's almost like sort of Raffles, the gentleman thief, isn't it?
Yeah.
Away with such trivial annoyances.
Yeah. I wonder, because there's Raffles and Bunny, isn't there?
Oh, yeah.
They're a double act as well. Yeah. Maybe you've hit on something there.
That could be it. Because we don't get any information about this pair. We get the little bit about some of their previous exploits, but we don't know their station in life, their backgrounds.
We don't know their backstory.
Yes.
And who cares?
What's the origin story? Where's the revenge plot? I mean, come on.
Yes, there could be a couple of gentleman thieves,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
A couple of chaps who are out to make a pretty penny.
Yeah.
So they set off on their quest. And Ulzuldarum doesn't seem to be that far away. It's sort of in walking distance or a few days walking distance.
Yeah.
But we get this, again, that typical thing that Smith does on the way there or at the start. The scenery is all very agreeable and flowery and green. And then when you get to the place at the end of the story, there's always that change,
Yeah, I love the here is when it happens, because it's all going about like fruits looking nice and plump and vibrant. And then it just goes, the words grew thicker and more rampant as we went on. There you go.
There's Smith.
There it is.
A stealthy viper with pale and heavy coils glided away from our feet among the rank leaves of the roadside. Huge purpureal bats.
There's the purpureal. That's got to be a goth band name, isn't it, Tim?
Yeah.
Purpureal bats.
Oh, damn right. Yeah, purpureal bats. I love it. Yeah. Yeah, because now you get poisonous looking fruits. It's interesting. And unwholesomely large petals on the flowers.
And there's just one other thing on this trip, because they've got we know they've got no Pazurs. They've not got a Pazur to their name. So they're kind of living off the local villagers or people who they go to, whether by thieving or trickery or whatever means. And some of these people, I'm sure, must still remember us with regret For we did not deny ourselves anything procurable that tempted our fancy or our appetites. I just wondered what fancies and appetites they were talking about there, to be honest.
Oh, matron. It's all of it.
And remember us with regret. That sort of implies maybe there's a lasting reminder of some sort of assignation. There's a little Satampra Zeiros Junior somewhere.
Yeah, a little bun left in an oven somewhere. Yeah. I love the fact as well that even though they're absolutely skint, we contrived to procure along our way a large leathern bottle full of palm spirit. So they were on the sauce again.
It's turning into sort of with now and I, isn't it?
It is very much so. But also, Fafhrd and the Grey Mouse are also their story. Well, there's which one is it? There's one where they both meet, ill-met in Lankmar, and they spend most of that completely out of their skulls.
Yeah,
they end up.
Yeah, same with Adept's Gambit as well. They spend most of that pissed up in a tavern.
Yeah.
Which you kind of get in Conan to an extent, but then most of that seems to take place off screen in the Conan stories. There's a couple where he's suffering from a hangover, I think.
There's a wonderful one in Rogues in the House where he's let out of a prison cell, goes back home, throws his treacherous ex-girlfriend in a cesspit.
Does he then run into the door trying to escape because he's so drunk? I think he knocks himself out. So we eventually arrive at Comorium, and it's night when they arrive. In good, like you say, that's a good old haunted house timing.
Yeah. Of course, all you need is a rumble of thunder, isn't it? It's.
And we get this nice description of the gleam of marble cupolas above the treetops, and between the boughs and boles, the wan pillars of shadowy porticos.
Nice.
So it's already set up to be a spooky place.
Yeah. It doesn't need to describe it in also detail. Words like porticos, just the cadaverous moon.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that's good, isn't it? That's a nice change from a gibbous moon, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is, isn't it? Oh, yeah. Yeah, she just got these built of dark basaltic stone, heavily encrusted with lichens that seemed of a coeval antiquity. It's all you need. It only needs to say, you know what you're getting, don't you? Sort of crumbling, greenish, like gravestones, basically. Yeah.
And Tirov starts to get the jitters a bit here, doesn't he? I wish it were daylight.
Yeah.
His low tones were oddly sibilant, unnaturally audible in the dead stillness. And I think this is Satampra's answer to that is, well, let's have another drink.
Pretty much. Yeah. Get this down here and stop moaning. Yeah.
And having finished the rest of the drink, they start to explore a bit more and find a square that the jungle had not yet wholly usurped. And in the centre of the square is a small temple of antique architecture, which gave the impression of being far older even than the adjoining edifices. It's also in a very different style as well, because this is of a dark stone, heavily encrusted with lichens that seemed of a coeval antiquity, as you said. So again, it is that, like you said, gravestones. You can see that green.
Yeah, it's like a mausoleum, isn't it? Almost like when you go to like Kensal Green or Highgate, and you got them crumbling old mausoleums and stuff, and they're all, I love all that. Well, dodgy goth, isn't it?
In a way, it's as if it's a Neolithic long barrow in the middle of a graveyard, because that's the real thing about it. It's far older. You got this ancient city, which is, it's been abandoned by the people who moved to the other one a long, long time ago. And then in the middle of this, there's a much, much older temple. And that's cosmic horror coming into it.
Yes.
It's ancient. And then the temple is even more ancient.
Yeah.
Ancient could it be?
Nice. And it's almost, did the city grow up around this temple?
Yeah.
Was this some central point back in the day? Because you think, when we know what's in there and everything else, you'd want to be living as far away from that as possible, wouldn't you?
But no, just the White Sibyl of Polarian made a prophecy. And
I wonder if it started out as a settlement of the Vormi, because they were the original inhabitants of Hyperborea, the furry, almost Yeti-like guys who all worshipped Tsathoggua. So I wonder if it was their sort of settlement, and then when man came along and turfed them out, pretty much, they demolished their dwellings, built their own, but they didn't dare touch old Toadface's house because, you know, especially what lives in it.
It's interesting that you've got Lomar in Lovecraft stories and Hyperborean, and they're both supposed to be, you know, somewhere beyond the Arctic Circle. And you've got the Vormes in Hyperborean. You've got the Nofkes, if I'm correctly pronouncing it, and they're the same kind of, you know, kind of ape men.
Yeah.
Yeti, whatever.
Yeah.
It's very similar ideas.
And also I was thinking as well that this is the same idea as, you know, Christian churches were built on old pagan in inverted commas sites and everything else.
Stone circles and
yeah. Well, a lot of the churches were just slapped on top of them.
Yeah.
Just literally built on top of them.
So was it the case that people worshipping Tsathoggua, or was it the case of they just wanted to leave it alone and just kind of pretend it isn't there?
Or was there some kind of benefit to them living so close to it? Were they worshipping Tsathoggua in awful rites that brought them some kind of...
Because they recognise this for what it is, right? They recognise we knew it for a shrine of Tsathoggua, one of the elder gods who receives no longer any worship from men. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, there you go.
But before whose ashen altars people say the furtive and ferocious beasts of the jungle, the ape, the giant sloth, and the long-toothed tiger have sometimes been seen to make obeisances and have been heard to howl or whine their inarticulate prayer.
Oh, so good, isn't
it?
I like the reference to megafauna, you know, saber-toothed tigers, and, that kind of thing, which gives you that sense of this being prehistoric, and yet you've got people living in a kind of Bronze Age sort of civilization.
Presumably the saber-toothed tigers were hunting the mammoth. Kind of thing, wasn't it?
The mastodon that they used to for the vellum.
So they of course it's a temple. The door is slightly ajar. Temples, everyone knows, have jeweled idols within.
For some reason.
Not to mention the various altarpieces of valuable metals. We felt the urge of temptation. It's an open door, they're thieves, they're going in.
Yeah, I love that. The black interior of the temple yawned before us, and from it there surged an odour of long imprisoned mustiness combined with a queer and unfamiliar fetidity. There you are, there's your word. Yeah.
There it is.
Fetidity. I like the fact that the temple, even though it's older than this old abandoned city, is in a state of well-nigh perfect preservation. Apart from the carved lintel of the door, it's better preserved than this ancient city that is actually a lot newer than the temple.
That should tell you something, shouldn't it? There's some agency at work here for us.
You can just imagine some Vormi just going, you know, like when you see like houses in this country that have been there since the since the Tudors, and then you see something built in the 50s that's falling down. You can just imagine a Vormi going, "Oh, they don't build them like they used to."
You want to have a little altar to Tsathoggua in the house. That's obviously what maintains it. And I like this little line as well. With my usual foresight, he's not a modest man, is he, Satampra Zeiros? I had provided myself with a piece of resinous wood earlier in the day, thinking it might serve as a torch in case of any nocturnal explorations of Comorium. For me, this is going straight into Dungeons and Dragons now. And I think we've spoken about this before, that I don't think Smith was in the original Appendix N list.
No.
That was when we had Jeff on from the Appendix N podcast, wasn't it? We spoke about that.
Yeah, Jeff. Yeah. Wasn't in the original Appendix N, which is boggling, really. Yeah.
Well, there's some speculation. I mean, Gary Gygax was a devout Catholic, and there was some speculation that Smith was a little bit too racy for him to include. I don't know how accurate that is, because he was added in later lists. I think he was later put back. Perhaps it was just an oversight. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. Or possibly no one thought of him because he's more associated with horror and that kind of thing. And this is a bit of an anomaly, a real dungeon bash of a story.
Yeah, could be.
Yeah.
But then, Jack Vance was on the list and that kind of thing, wasn't it, as well? So.
Well, you have to be, considering they ripped off the whole magic system from his Dying Earth stories.
Oh, yeah. Of course, yeah. So there we are. Here is where we get our first glimpse at the two-tiered altar of obscenely figured metal before the image. Obscenely figured metal?
Yeah.
We can leave that to our imagination.
He likes his racy statues, doesn't he, Smith?
He does.
There's a lot of like phalluses and things like that in there.
There's one of the Conan stories that I think Lynn Carter and L. Sprague de Camp perpetrated, Conan the Buccaneer, where Conan is a pirate, obviously, and they come to a mysterious island and they find a temple of Tsathoggua. And of course, it has an animate idol which comes up to life and chases them round and round and round this island for half the novel. And they're rather less coy about precisely what makes it obscene.
Yes, it's one of those normally obscenely proportioned, isn't it, and that kind of stuff. Yeah, and there's a basin, a curious-looking basin of bronze, supported in 3 legs.
Now that basin is of key importance to the plot.
Yes, don't forget the basin, but they ignore the basin, right? Because they think, right, idol, jewels, let's go and have a look. And they thrust the torch into the face of the idol. That's never a good idea in abandoned temples, is it?
No.
So here's where we get our first description of Tsathoggua. He was very squat and pot-bellied. His head was more like that of a monstrous toad than a deity, and his whole body was covered with an imitation of short fur, giving somehow a vague suggestion of both the bat and the sloth. His sleepy lids were half lowered over his globular eyes, and a tip of a queer tongue issued from his fat mouth. I think someone described him as kind of like a malignant Buddha, which I thought was a nice description.
Yeah. Or me when I'm having a night in front of the telly.
I wondered about that fur.
Yeah.
It's definitely got all the hallmarks of the heathen idol, which is just there to be robbed.
Mm.
That is why they have heathen idols, so that people can go into temples and rob them. Of course, the idol tends to come to life and so on. But, these are things you have to deal with if you're some kind of adventurer.
And again, this resonates in history, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, back when Vikings were plundering churches, or even when Christians were plundering churches. I mean, basically, a temple or a church was seen as a repository for some sort of treasure.
They were only in it for the money. The wonderful story in the early Discworld, first of the Discworld stories, which is 4 short stories in one. And I think it's the third one where they meet Hrun the Barbarian, and they end up in the temple of Bel Shamameroth, I think it is. And Hrun starts to lever up the altar, and Rincewind says, "Why are you doing that?" And Hrun says, "You find choke apples under a choke apple tree, you find treasure under altars."
Nice. Love it.
Yes. I suppose back in the day it was, I suppose it was an offering to the deity.
Yeah.
But also maybe a place to store your treasure that was safe, perhaps, or was deemed safe, maybe. I don't know.
Well, in Sumeria, some people say banking begins in Sumeria because the Sumerians, the priests would take X amount of the produce, the grain and so forth of the people, and they keep it there, and they would, it would be seed grain possibly, and they could, you get a loan of it at a extortionate rate, and that's basically how they kept their power, and they were basically the bankers of their day. So it's probably something like that the priests would take these offerings to the god, but obviously that would make them terribly wealthy.
Yeah.
And you get that kind of cynicism about priests is you get all the way through this kind of writing from Lord Dunsany onwards.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, you got that classic quote, haven't you? The biggest bank in the world is the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
So
carrying on an old tradition.
Yeah.
And even back in the Bible, and the money lenders in the temple and everything else.
Yeah.
So
God and Mammon.
Yeah. And back in the day, I think certainly in the Middle Ages, I read that churches were almost like an open area. They'd be almost like a marketplace.
Yeah.
not the very quiet sort of places they are now, certainly Church of England, but people just be wandering in and out. There'd be livestock wandering around, you know.
And the old St. Paul's, before Christopher Wren's version, they had money changers and all kinds of things, despite what the Bible said, bizarrely.
Yeah.
But our heroes are to be disappointed, because with a niggardliness beyond parallel, even the eyes are being carven from the same dull stone as the rest of the abominable thing. And the mouth, nose, ears, and all other orifices, this is a very accurate statue, were unadorned. We can only wonder at the avarice or poverty of the beings who had wrought this unique bestiality.
I've never thought about the arsehole of the Tsathoggua before.
There's an image.
But you have now, and you never will get it out of your mind.
No.
Is that going to be a new story title?
Yeah, I think it might be. Yeah.
Or a goth band.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, like it.
I was thinking of a kind of Lord of the Rings sort of idea there.
Nice.
The Ring of Tsathoggua.
Nice. Yeah, I love it.
So there's no treasure on the idol. It's not gem encrusted or anything else. And in disappointment, they turn to look at this basin. Now, what do we make of this? The 3 legs that bore it were curved and massive and terminated in feline paws displaying their talons. That's an interesting little detail. I wonder if you kind of hark back to the sort of saber-toothed tiger and the fact that Tsathoggua seems to be worshipped by animals as well as humans or non-humans or pre-humans.
Yeah, very possibly.
What this reminds me of, actually, the way this pans out, reminds me very much of the Tower of the Elephant, probably a Howard story, which was written a bit later. But there's a similar kind of, it's a bit like a locked room mystery. You can't see what the monster is at this point. There's no idea that there's a monster. And in the Tower of the Elephant, there's a bit where they get into the top of the tower. The thief that Conan's with gets into the top of the tower first and is killed. And Conan can't work out what it is. And he's looking around the thing, and there's a kind of jeweled thing up on top of the roof, on the ceiling, which turns out to actually be this giant spider that killed him. And it's a bit like this, where you don't actually realise that the contents of this basin are actually, what are they?
That is the monster. And funny enough, we said about Conan being the lone hero, but there he is with Taurus of Nemedia. There's the thieving double act again, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so this bowl has got this viscous and semi-liquescent substance, quite opaque and of a sooty colour. And it's giving off a bit of a niff.
Yeah.
Unsurpassably foul, but nevertheless not an odour of putrefaction, but resembled rather the smell of some vile and unclean creature of the marshes.
Nice. Yeah. So this is obviously the first appearance of the formless spawn, isn't it?
Yes.
Which I actually think is probably the most, aside from like out of the weird fiction thing, it's probably the most used thing because it actually appeared in a video game. Yeah, id Software's Quake from 1996, the first-person shooter, actually has the formless spawn of Tsathoggua as one of the enemies. The end boss is Shub-Nagroth. So yeah. It's got dimensional shamblers in it and all sorts. But yeah, and they're annoying little buggers, the formless spawn. They leap about really quickly. They're really hard to shoot.
Yeah. It's a bit like a Shoggoth in a way. It's that kind of viscous blob that tends to not come across very well in Star Trek and things like that. It's difficult to actually realise in low-budget sci-fi.
It usually ends up just looking like a scrotum, doesn't it, when they do things like that?
Pretty terrifying.
It is really, yeah.
So I'm going from bad to worse. What's next? I don't know. I was thinking then, you say low budget film, but the blob wasn't bad, was it? When was that? Late 50s, early 60s? It was colour film, wasn't it? It must have been sort of early 60s. I think they did a remake.
Something like that, yeah.
I liked the remake. I really
I've
enjoyed it. It was campy as all hell, but I really enjoyed it. It was proper 80s camp, you know. It was all neon and bright colours.
80s
No,
camp.
exactly. I loved it. I remember seeing it when it came out. It's like, it's brilliant.
Yeah, colourful at least.
That Shoggothi aspect also reminds me a bit of Thog in the Slithering Shadow, the Conan story, which is kind of Shoggothi, protoplasmic. It's in the same arc.
And there's something there, a description of it, about how Conan can't work out if it's a long way away from him or right close up.
Yes.
Or
Yeah.
A bit like the colour from outer space.
Yes.
Yeah, it plays with your senses. There's something otherworldly about it, or other dimensionally, or something. So you can really picture this. What I like about this story and a lot of Smith stuff, it's very sort of cinematic as well. You could see this as a Twilight Zone or whatever.
It's the language. It's so vivid. You don't have to use your imagination. Clark Ashton Smith's language does it for you.
Yes, true. Yeah. They're looking in this bowl and there's a little ripple. Well, he doesn't say ripple. He says ebullition. And the ebullition increases rapidly. And you think at this point, this is sort of where you'd start backing out, isn't it? But I guess they're both a bit pissed. And, they've come a long way and something interesting is happening. So let's stick around and see what it is. And as we know, what it is a formless spawn that rises up. An uncouth amorphous head with dull and bulging eyes arose gradually on an ever-lengthening neck and stared us in the face with primordial malignity.
Now that's the worst kind of malignancy.
Forget your newfangled.
This is a genuine article, primordial as they come.
And I wonder if this then goes back to things like Ubo Sattler and that sort of primordial sort of
don't we all?
Yes, well, yeah. They didn't have that on my ancestry.com. They didn't mention that. So this is where they recoil.
And don't forget the tentacles.
Oh, tentacles. Yes, we get some tentacles.
Appendages.
Oh, yeah.
And the whole mass of the dark fluid began to rise. And this is nice. Far more quickly than the Savannah juice runs from my pen, it poured over the rim of basin, like a torrent of black quicksilver.
Lovely.
Yeah. I can imagine that. I don't know why. It doesn't make sense, black quicksilver, but I can just picture it.
Yeah, the way Mercury moves. You can just,
And then to me it gets even more creepy because as it reaches the floor in an undulant Ophidian form, it immediately develops more than a dozen short legs, which is sort of like millipede-y, centipede-y, snaky.
Well, this reminds me of The Thing.
Oh, yes.
You know, the head in the film, where the head sprouts legs and eye stalks. It reminds me of that for some reason.
It slithers towards them with unbelievable speed. It opens a toothless mouth of amazing capacity. And we saw that our departure from the fane of Tsathoggua has become most imperative.
Classic understatement there. When most people go, fucking hell, leg it.
So then we get the chase scene through the jungle, through the ruins. We stumbled over roots and fallen trees. We tore our raiment and lacerated our skins on the savage brambles. We collided in the gloom with huge trunks and limber saplings that bent before us. We heard the hissing of tree snakes that spat their venom at us from the boughs above, and the grunting or howling of unseen animals when we trod upon them in our precipitate flight. But we no longer dared to stop or look behind. So this is like a blind panic they're in. They're just screaming, running through, bashing into things, falling over things.
The kind of scene you get in the 80s slasher film where they just run and run and run and run round in circles, basically.
And the killer's just walking really slowly behind them and somehow always manages to catch up. Or one step ahead of them. Yeah.
And where do they end up?
Of course.
Back where they started. Yeah.
So do you think this is just by chance, or do you think this is part of the snare, the trap that once this thing has gone, then they're somehow drawn back to the temple?
It's interesting, because I thought that when I was reading it again this morning. I was kind of like, it's interesting. Is it almost like reality's warping around them to bring them back bring its prey back to it, you know.
And the monster is still behind them, the elastic monster, whose legs are now lengthened till it towered above us, and whose maw was wide enough to have swallowed us both at a mouthful. So this thing seems to have grown in size as well. It's sort of looming over them. And there's only one place they can go, right? Back into the temple.
Yeah, I love this bit now because they go in, they shut the door, but then mentions that I think I've said that the lintel of the door had crumbled and splintered away in several places. In fact, the beginning process of ruin had made those apertures through which the daylight now filtered, and which were large enough to have permitted the passage of small animals or sizable serpents. For some reason, our eyes were drawn to these apertures.
And this is so cinematic again, because you can imagine the we're back, it's sort of dawn now, or sort of very early, the beginnings of dawn. You can imagine that faint light coming in through these holes, and then one by one, those lights
it's eclipsed.
The black material began to pour through them, ran down the door in a triple stream to the flagstones, reunited and resumed the form of the thing that had followed us.
Love it. Yeah.
You're screwed.
Pretty much.
And I love the response. Satampra Zeiros just says, "Farewell, Tira von Palios," and runs and hides behind the idol.
Yeah. Again, you've got that. It's like the cameraman in the savannah with the lion. Yeah.
You give him a dead leg and run.
Yeah.
So poor old Tirov, the only place he can really hide is the bowl, which you just know is not going to end well.
Yeah, it reminds me a bit of what was the childhood game where there are so many chairs and more people than chairs?
Oh yeah. Musical chairs.
That's the one. Yeah, it's like that.
Yeah.
Tulu Van Polios is the one who's left standing.
He was a bit slow off the mark.
I was always that one. I was always that kid.
But you were never eaten by a thing, I hope.
Well, there were one or two times.
That's why you should always carry your elder sign.
This is it.
You know. So Satampra is peering from behind the statue, whose one merit was the width of his abdomen and haunches. Big booty.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to bring attention to. I love
booty.
That. Yeah,
he's a big boy.
The booty of Tsathoggua.
In more ways than one.
Always the one. Yeah, and then we get this nice, well, it's not nice, it's a horrible image of the thing. I love the way it's called the thing as well. I mean, you say it's like the thing, and it is called the thing. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And it sort of towers above the basin and then crashes down.
Like a lapsing wave.
Yes. And that's the end of poor old Turu von Palios. Didn't even have time to scream. And this is where Satampra decides he's going to make his escape while the thing is busy devouring his friend.
Yes. I love this line when he's going to shoot the bolt because but he's greatly fears disturbing it. I felt that it would be highly injudicious to disturb the entity in the bowl while it was digesting Tira von Palios, but there seemed to be no other way.
Passing the bowl on tiptoe.
Yeah, you need the sound effects.
And isn't it that kind of drunk thing again, where you come home late at night really drunk and you try not to make any noise and you bang the door and you fall down the stairs.
Trying to get your trousers off in the dark.
A bit about passing the bowl on tiptoe. It's straight out of Scooby-Doo.
But this then takes us right back to the very first line, because he pulls the bolt back. A single tentacle sprang out with infernal rapidity from the basin, and elongating it itself across the whole room, it encircled my right wrist in a lethal clutch. Oh. And this is where, again, I thought of the Conan slithering shadow thing, because it's unlike anything I've ever touched. Indescribably viscid and slimy and cold and soft and sharp, like metal, like a bog. It's what you've got very much in that story, all these contradictions. Yeah. It feels cold, it feels hot, it feels rough, it feels smooth.
It's completely the unnameable, something beyond human comprehension. Nice little slice of cosmic horror for you.
Yes.
Yeah, we're back to Megalos again, Rob. It is beyond your comprehension. Yeah. I'm sure Gavin knows what I mean.
Mr. Cactus.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, Mr. Cactus. Yeah.
And I suppose, luckily, in a way, it takes his hand, but it does sort of cauterize the stump for him.
Which is nice.
It's kind of thoughtful, isn't it? I saw that my hand was gone, leaving a strangely withered stump from which little blood issued. Then, gazing behind me into the shrine, I saw the tentacle recoil and shorten till it passed from view behind the rim of the basin, bearing my lost hand to join whatever now remained of Tiruv on Palios.
It brings a whole new meaning to finger buffet, doesn't it?
You did have some wonderful endings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that it just ends there. It's, it's great because it obviously circles back to the beginning, doesn't it? He got away. He's got his vellum from a mastodon. He's like, don't go to the bloody temple in Comorian.
Well, that's the interesting thing. You think, was this written sort of after he got back, or is this the older thief in later years saying, oh, I'm going to tell you my tale of whatever. You young thieves don't ever go there. And you can just imagine some young thief listening to this and thinking, yeah, but I bet there was some stuff there, really. I'm going to go and have a look. You can almost set up other stories from it.
Yeah, the Theft of the 39 Girdles is certainly written like that.
Yes.
Age is upon me now, and sitting at the ledger which I've earned through many hazards, I drink the wines that are heartening to age, and that's where he's and return memories of splendid to me. Return memories of splendid loot and brave nefarious enterprise. You get the impression of this old thief who's remembering.
Yeah, so maybe written at the same time. It's the memoirs of Satampra Zeiros.
Yes.
There's an idea for an anthology.
Yeah. Well, how many other adventures and escapades did Satampra Zeiros get up to?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
He lost his hand.
Yeah.
There was a very nice line near the start that spoke about more prosperous days are more profitable midnights, which I thought was very nice.
Nice. Profitable Midnights. That's another band name, isn't it?
What I like about it is the plot. It's got a good, strong plot, but it's very simple. Two thieves go to a lost city with the intention of robbing the place. They meet some kind of weird monster. One of them dies. The other one manages to get away, losing his hand. But the language and the imagery is what makes it just something completely out of this world, to use a cliche.
Definitely. I think that's Smith's strong point, isn't it? It's the vivid language, how visual it is. It's all, like you said before, it's almost filmic, cinematic. You can picture it in your head as you're reading it.
And the thing is, back then, of course, films were in black and white. You couldn't get this kind of colour by going to the cinema.
Yeah, because that's something, colour is such a big part of Smith's work, isn't it?
And pulp, 30s pulp in general, is very vivid. And you find that writing tends to get a lot less colourful, and people sneer about
purple
prose just when glorious Technicolor starts to come in.
That's a good point.
The more film, the more film becomes colourful, the more drab writing becomes.
That's a very interesting observation. Yeah.
So, shall we talk a little bit about Hyperborea? Because there were 10 stories, and they were the worst selling of Smith's tales out of all of them, quite strangely.
Terrifying. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that he received a princely sum of $48 for this piece, which you considered he received, what was it, 70 for?
Yeah. And I think
zombie?
The previous ones were about $20, weren't they? The rattlesnake and one of the short stories. Yeah. So I suppose, like we said, for the time, that's not bad.
No, it was actually quite good for the time.
The fact that it was rejected the way it was, and well, we've sort of covered that, I guess, already. But it just constantly baffles me.
Yeah, Farnsworth Wright could not quite handle a story about two thieves and a former spawn of Tsathoggua.
Yeah, for a magazine called Weird Tales. Yeah. This constantly baffles me.
I could say it's weird.
And it's a tale. I mean, it fits the bill on both counts.
Weirder than a lot of things. It did get in to Weird Tales.
Yeah, I was actually, when I've read back through some issues, there is some stories that are very, very not weird in any shape or form. Yeah. It's just like, Why is that in here?
One of the things I noticed were you get quite a lot of stories that just set in exotic places.
Yeah.
The Philippines. There was a whole series of stories written by someone who lived in the Philippines, and they're just about an exotic place. I suppose weird from the point of view of the average American reader.
Yeah.
But not nearly as weird as ancient Hyperborea.
Yeah.
And perhaps that's it, because we spoke about that exoticism last time, because Venus of a Zombie is obviously set in Africa. And just that idea that, I can't remember the exact line, but it was like dark and mysterious Africa with its hidden secrets. Well, not to the people who live there. They just go out and they farm their fields and whatever, Well, but it was of its day, wasn't it? That sort of exoticism, I suppose.
And I suppose if you were just an average thief in ancient Hyperborea, it was just another day's work or night's work.
Yeah, yeah.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, weirdness is in the eye of the beholder, which is another D&D reference.
Ah, nice. Yeah.
See what I did there?
I think Clark Ashton Smith went out of his way to make it weird. I mean, Hyperborea, this jungle cities in north of the Arctic Circle, all these Ice Age creatures and all these things. It's like, what can I think of that would just be really bizarre?
Yes.
Seems to be his guiding idea.
Especially in stories like The Coming of the White Worm. I mean, that's just surreal. Yeah. I love that one. It's another one of my favourites. But it's you got this island that moves about randomly. It's just it's so bizarre.
But it's also a little bit like we've got The Lost World and Conan Doyle and that kind of idea with the dinosaurs, and even King Kong, I suppose, to an extent. Yeah. But he adds another level of weirdness on top of that by putting it back in this time. He actually said, my Hyperborean tales, it seems to me, with their primordial and sometimes pre-mundane background and figures, are the closest to the Cthulhu mythos. But most of them are written in a vein of grotesque humour that differentiates them vastly. However, such a tale as The Coming of the White Worm might be regarded as a direct contribution to the mythos.
Yeah.
So we know there was this huge interplay, especially when it came to Tsathoggua, who Lovecraft used in The Mound, the horror in the museum, and I think Mountains of Madness, there's some Hyperborean references in there.
Yeah, you got some interesting stuff in this, in the letters to Derleth. It was post-Lovecraft's death, when they're talking about putting together the collection, and Smith and Derleth are spending a lot of time talking about the mythos and what is considered Cthulhu mythos and all the rest of it. And and Smith says that my contributions are basically Tsathoggua, the White Worm, the Book of Ebon, and Lovecraft did this, that, and the other. And because I always find it interesting reading this, because a lot of people basically say that, it was Derleth who codified it and made it. But no, they were all doing it. Yeah. Like they were all doing it. They were all going, oh, well, this bit fits with this, and this bit goes there, and I think this bit goes here, and Frank Belknap Long's bit goes over here, and they were all contributing to it. Yeah. So I think it's unfair that Derleth gets sort of slated for that, because they were doing it contemporaneously.
What he did was found Arkham House and kept it going, which for some reasons made him a target, rather than someone people should feel grateful to.
Well, that's what we said when we covered him, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
But and there are letters. I'm not even going to try and read the names out where it says such and such, HZUEALMD, etc. Was the father of Tsathoggua and the cousin of YQAEZZ. None of which appear in any of the stories, but they did actually detail this stuff out. Now, how serious they were about that or whatever, I don't know, but it's certainly there.
Yeah.
It's Smith's The Parchments of Phnom, which was it's included in the Tsathoggua cycle, and it was sort of a pseudo essay, and in it he has a mythos family tree in it, which is really interesting to look at. It's really cool,
and it makes them all sound very cozy, like the Olympians.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. You got Hastur and Cthulhu, sort of brothers. They don't really get on all the time.
It's a strange idea, isn't it? It's strange.
The other thing I find interesting about Hyperborea is the fact you've got Hyperborea here, and then you've got Robert E. Howard's Hyperborea and Hyborea.
Yes.
And they're
Yes.
That's one of the places where all these things don't quite gel, because you've got two different Hyperboreas. They are completely distinct. But then again, you've got Hyperborea and Lomar, and Lovecraft said, oh, Lomar is obviously, country next door to Hyperborea.
Yeah. And I think Lemuria and Atlantis are mentioned in the Hyperborean stories as well. So you've got that mixing.
And Brian Lumley's Primal Lands as well sort of is around all, because there's mentions in that of Hyperborea and all these bits and bobs.
If we take the Hyperborean tales as being set in the Pleistocene era, which, as we know, was followed by the Blue Tack era. Sorry.
I was going to say, I thought you had
I know. It's
That's what the former Spawn was made out of.
A big ball of blue tack. Yeah, I like it.
Marvellous. Well, that short era took place from 2.5 million to 11,700 years ago. So that was quite a long era. I'm not sure how long all those eras are, but we're kind of at the end of the dinosaurs. So there's maybe that slight overlap. And some people have speculated, because obviously people have got calculators out and worked all this out.
Of course, yeah.
That Smith was writing about the Eemian interglacial period, which is at the very end of the Pleistocene.
I thought so myself.
Yeah.
Spotted a mile off.
Yeah. Isn't that where Pingu's from?
Emus, isn't it? Rod Hole.
Emus, Rod Hole. Yeah.
I read somewhere, though, that Siberia during the Ice Age was actually quite a warm place, while Northern Europe and North America were like Siberia are now.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, haven't you got the fossils and things that have like fossilized trees and things like palm trees and stuff in the Arctic and all that kind of business?
So that sort of it's interesting to speculate how much you would have researched this as well, But they're thinking of that time period as being about 130,000 to 70,000 BP, not BC, BP. Have you heard of this, by the way, BP and BC?
Yeah.
Because I was always brought up on BC and AD.
Yeah, BP is basically before the present. So if you add about 2000 to it, take away 2000 from it, or 2022, in fact, from it, you get the BC date. But when it comes to dates that far back, none of them make any sense to me. It's just far too long ago.
Yeah.
So it's enough to make you a creationist.
I can't remember which book it was in, but it was something like, or film, and it was something like 2000 or 2500 BC. Wednesday, 3:00. And people put the Hyperborean age at about 10,000 BC. So you can fit all this stuff together with a little bit of crowbarring if you don't look too closely. Because obviously we have that cycles of civilizations falling and rising and all the rest of it. And
also the fact that what we do know, and further back, what we do know is just the few things that have survived. For all we know, there were former spawn. I mean, former spawn of Tsathoggua would not show up in the fossil record.
True. Yeah,
that's very true. Yeah.
There's a film, I think it was on Netflix or one of those things about if mankind disappeared tomorrow, how long would all this last? And I think it was within a couple of 100 years, because concrete decays and rots. Within a couple of 100 years, there's virtually no trace of us.
Oh, yeah.
And especially now everything's digital as well. I mean, where does that go,
Yeah. I've been thinking about ebooks and that kind of thing. I mean, my Kindle's full to capacity, so I started deleting them. But, they're like that. Ebooks will just vanish. Yeah. Books last. Paperbacks last. People, you don't just throw it away. You give it to the charity shop or whatever.
Yeah.
But ebooks, press a button and they're gone.
That's very true.
Yeah. It's disposable media, isn't it? It's like digital music and everything. Whereas it's like I've still got all my vinyl and I've still got boxes full of CDs. Whereas, an MP3, if my hard drive dies, it's gone, isn't it?
Of course. Pulp was much the same. That was disposable.
Yeah, it was. The whole word says, doesn't it? That's exactly what it was.
Yeah,
and it's that thing as well of having the technology to replay or access it, because you even to get a VHS recorder now, I don't think you could buy one in the high street anymore.
Yeah, no, credited.
I've got 3 of them in my cupboard.
Steam driven.
I'm such a hoarder of old crap. I've still got cassette decks and all sorts of crap lying around it. Yeah. I'll never get rid of anything just in case. What if I want to play that bootleg cassette that I bought down Wythenshawe Market?
So if we just go back to Lovecraft for a second and Tsathoggua, because we do find this as well. This is in a letter, December the 19th, 1929, so it's before his sweary letter. As for me, Tsathoggua made such an impression on my fancy that I am using him in the revision, i.e. ghostwriting job I am now doing, telling of some things connected with his worship before he appeared on the Earth's surface.
That's the mound, isn't it?
Yeah. As you know, my tale concerns a netherworld of unbelievable antiquity below the Mound and Pueblo region of the American Southwest. So, yes.
Lovely.
And I believe because Satampra Zeiros was not taken up, the mound actually appeared first.
Yeah, it did. Yeah.
Although Clark Ashton Smith invented it and wrote about it first, in the public eye, Lovecraft was first with Tsathoggua.
It was Zelia Bishop.
Oh, yes.
But it was, but interestingly, Lovecraft did get it first in print because whereas the mound came first, Whisperer came before the mound. And he gets a name check in that.
Ah, right. So the Whisperer was actually the first one. Yeah.
Even though that was written after the mound. You know how publishing is.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
But he was in the Hazel Hill story as well, the horror in the museum. I think that was So there's a mention in there. And as we've already mentioned the computer game, but Tsathoggua appeared in some other things as well. He was in the Illuminatus trilogy, which I'd forgotten about. The Robert Anton Wilson book where he was Saint Toad.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember that now. Yeah. That was a bizarre trilogy.
It is. We should cover that on the IBC sometimes. I'm not quite sure how. Just to read all that again and talk about it would be quite a
read it and stay sane.
Yes. Yeah. Michael Shea has written a story about Tsathoggua.
Yeah.
And Tsathoggauans, they're described, are also the mind parasites in Colin Wilson's book of the same name, which I've not read for years. I must go back.
No, I haven't.
I don't think I've read it at all. It's one of those ones that never came my way.
Yeah. So Tsathoggua has popped up in all sorts of places.
Yeah, in the Tsathoggua cycle, you've got stories from, like you just mentioned Michael Shea. That's a really good one. And you've got John Glasby, Gary Myers, Stanley C. Sargent. Yeah, quite a few people have done it. I mean, I've done a couple of stories. I've done a couple now. So, kind of had to, really, because he's my favourite mythos entity. So,
and it's interesting because Lovecraft changed him slightly to make him more toad-like. So, but I guess with these things, that idea of we can never fully comprehend their form or shape anyway. So, it's always a vague impression.
It's also interesting that Tsathoggua both filtered down from Saturn or Psychronosh and also came up from the depths of the Earth.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Got about a bit, didn't he? but when you look like a bat and a sloth and a toad all at the same time, you're capable of anything.
Yeah. Well, wasn't it Lovecraft who added the wings? Because I don't think there's a mention of the wings in Satampra Zeiros.
Something about a bat, but I'm not sure about the wings.
Yeah, it's a bat-like, but he doesn't mention wings, whereas Lovecraft has seen bat and gone, oh, he's got wings.
Yeah. Is there an equivalent to the Balrog debate then? Wings or no wings?
Bloody Balrog.
Perhaps we should start that up, to get a bit of traffic to the stir up a bit of controversy. Tsathoggua, wings or not?
The Tsathoggua controversy.
Love it.
And just going back to the Hyperborean idea as well, it seems Smith did get some ideas from Blavatsky and the Theosophists.
Yeah.
He actually said, one can disregard the Theosophy and make good use of the stuff about elder continents, etc. That was in a letter to Lovecraft in 1933. And Lynn Carter actually drew a map of Hyperborea as well, which I think is floating around on the internet somewhere.
Yeah, it's in one of the Lost World. No, it's in the Hyperborea collection that Lynn Carter edited, which was a Panther edition around the same time as Lost World. The 2 volumes of that. There was Hyperborea, and I think he did one. I think he did an Atlantean one as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a map in the front of that.
And I think I'm right in saying there's an RPG rule set based specifically in Hyperborean or that kind of setting, which I think uses that map as well. But I'd have to check that. If I can find it, I'll put a link up to it in the notes.
A little bit of self-promotion here. I did a series of sword and sorcery Cthulhu mashups, edited them. The second one was Swords Against Cthulhu. They were all Swords Against Cthulhu. Hyperborean Knights.
Oh.
And if you can find a copy of that, there's some entertaining stories in it. Someone actually was mentioning on one of the sword and sorcery pages on Facebook that one of the stories in it by Stephen Hernandez was the most disturbing story he'd read.
Oh, brilliant.
It is quite gross, I have to admit.
Excellent. So a while ago, there was the whole thing. Some guy, he was just like, when does a bad review become promotion? Because there was an extreme horror writer, and he'd put up his new book, and somebody had torn it to bits, calling it morally degenerate. It was the foulest, most disgusting. It should be purged from the earth, and all the rest of it. Obviously, thumping the Bible, and this guy was like, "I'm putting that on all my posters. That's brilliant. That's the way to sell it."
The author was going, "Yes,
yeah, that's how you sell an extreme horror novel, isn't it?"
There's a writer called Vincent Biloff, I think it was, and he had a review very much like that. And basically, it was saying, "I was horrified by your horror novel." Well, yes.
Good.
Yes,
yeah.
That's the idea.
Is he a descendant of Farnsworth Wright? Do you think?
Yeah. Too weird.
I've had a weird story. Way too weird. All right. Well, Satampra Zeiros, I think, as we say, Clark Ashton Smith really getting into his stride, and it sort of develops from here on. Next time, we're looking at the Monster of the Prophecy, which is an even longer story. I think it's about twice the length, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a novelette, that one, isn't it?
Yeah, sort of interplanetary adventure, I suppose we could call it.
Yeah, it's an interesting one.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that. We hope you can join us. Gavin, thanks ever so much for coming on. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yep. Cheers, man.
Do you have any projects or anything else you got going on at the moment?
I do have. I'm pretty much halfway through writing a novel. I don't like to talk about them when I'm writing them because I end up not writing them, basically. But I will say one thing, Tim, it's inspired by you.
Oh, okay.
In that D'Artagnan is the
main character. Nice. Excellent.
Yeah, it's a spin-off from the Musketeers versus Cthulhu.
Perfect. Excellent. There's been a few spin-offs because Chris McCauley's doing a comic book of it, which I actually got the script the other day and edited. So so that's brilliant. I'm glad it's kind of becoming a monster all of its own. It's great. It's always nice when people look at your ideas and don't go, "That's stupid," and they actually go, "That's cool."
Yeah, you avoid the Farnsworth rights of the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it can't be too weird. There's an interesting problem. Can you write the weirdest story ever? That's quite a challenge. But this is how formless spawns generate those. See, they just break off little bits, and,
Yeah, exactly.
Create whole new formless.
Take on new forms.
All right, thanks very much for joining us today, folks. We hope you enjoyed that episode. Do let us know your thoughts, anything you agree with or disagree with, any of our pronunciations, as always, that you'd like to correct. And if you'd like to support the show and join our sort of growing band of patrons at the moment, then check out our Patreon site. When you sign up as a member, you get access to bonus content for both this and the Innsmouth Book Club, and you get a monthly copy of Innsmouth News as well. And if you sign up for the higher tiers, we'll be giving you advanced booking and discount booking on some interesting events that we're planning for next year. We're looking at putting on some Lovecraftian days or conventions across the country. Hopefully, fingers crossed. It's all in the planning stages, but we shall let you know. We'll be planning that over some flasks of
palm wine, and a loaf of bread.
So, you've got enough pizzazz.
So anything could happen. All right, thanks very much, Gavin, for coming in again. With that, it's goodbye from me, Rob Poynton.
And it's goodbye from me, Tim Mendes.
You have been listening to Strange Shadows, an Innsmouth Book Club production in association with Innsmouth Gore. For more information, visit innsmouthgold.com.